In 1927, they tore it down with sledgehammers. $250 million, 14 years to build, 121 rooms, and just 16 years after it was finished, the most expensive home in American history was wiped off the face of the earth. Its owner had an entire room carved out of a French palace and shipped across the ocean. He installed a pipe organ worth $3.5 million. He bought up masterpieces by the old masters. But this architectural monster, nobody wanted it. And if you think it fell victim to changing times or bad taste, you're wrong. Today, another building stands on this spot, but its foundation holds a secret. I'm going to tell you why this palace was cursed from its very first stone. Because its true story doesn't begin with blueprints on Fifth Avenue, but with $1 million bribe and blood at the bottom of America's richest, most dangerous mine. Here, on the corner of Fifth Avenue and 77th Street, stands a building, 960 Fifth Avenue. Look at it. Respectable, expensive, perfectly blended into the architectural fabric of Manhattan. Its residents are heirs to fortunes, titans of industry. But this facade is a lie. It hides a ghost. Here, on the most expensive intersection in the world, once stood a palace. Not just a house. It was a challenge thrown to an entire city. It was the most expensive, the largest, and perhaps the most hated private home in American history. An architectural scream that was heard from Wall Street to Washington. 121 rooms, 31 bathrooms, 4 art galleries larger than some halls in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, its own power plant, and an underground railroad to deliver coal. This was not a home. This was a declaration of war, carved in granite and marble. Every column, every ton of bronze declared, "I am here, and I am richer than the gods." Today, almost nothing of this colossus remains. The stone turned to dust. The dream vanished. Almost. This is all that outlived its creator. The Gold Room, the Salon Doré. Today, it's a jewel of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. People come here to admire the elegance of the 18th century. They see beauty. They see history. But they don't see the price. This gilded silk, these carved panels, were bought with money torn from the earth thousands of miles away. This is a trophy, brought from a battlefield where the currency wasn't dollars, but human lives. And that is the central paradox of this story. How did a structure built to last forever become a ghost in just 16 years? How did a fortress, meant to protect one man's legacy, leave behind only this golden cage? And the story of a man who tried to buy immortality? He believed that stone was eternal. He believed that gold never tarnishes. But he overlooked one thing. Before you build the walls, you must lay the foundation. And the foundation of his empire wasn't built on the bedrock of Manhattan. It was built on copper, bribes, and blood. To understand the palace on Fifth Avenue, you have to go underground. 2,000 feet underground, into the scorching, airless heart of a hill in Montana. Here, in the city of Butte, in a place they called the richest hill on earth, the true foundation of William Clark's mansion was laid. A foundation of copper, blood, and bribes. We are told the myth of the self-made man, born in a log cabin, started as a humble schoolteacher. But Clark's genius wasn't in finding a copper vein. It was in understanding that the real treasure was people. For William Clark, the world was not a garden, but a mine. Everything, people, laws, the land itself, was a resource to be extracted and smelted into capital. The first price of his fortune was human life. The miners of Butte worked in hell. Temperatures in the mine shafts reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was thick with toxic silica dust that burned the lungs from the inside out. The average life expectancy for a miner here was no more than 40 years. Every ingot of copper brought to the surface was paid for, with a shortened life. In 1895, an explosion ripped through his Kenyan Connell mine. 57 men were buried alive. For the city, it was a tragedy. For Clark, it was a line item on a balance sheet. The second price was the very idea of fair competition. He waged war, not on a battlefield, but in courtrooms, newspaper offices, and dark alleys. His main enemy was another copper king, Marcus Daly. It was a battle of titans where everything was fair game: blackmail, bribing journalists, industrial sabotage. Clark owned his own newspaper, the Butte Miner, and used it like a club to crush his rivals' reputations. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to destroy. But the peak of his philosophy was corruption. In 1899, William Clark decided he wanted to be a United States Senator. And he didn't try to win the favor of voters. He bought it, literally. His agents handed out over $1 million in cash to members of the Montana legislature. $10,000 in a plain envelope with the words, "I need to buy you." The scandal reached Washington. The Senate held a humiliating investigation and refused to seat him. It was a rare moment when his money proved powerless. Mark Twain famously quipped, "He is as rotten a human being as can be found anywhere under the flag. He is a shame to the American nation, and no one has helped to send him to the Senate who did not know that his proper place was the penitentiary, with a ball and chain on his legs." Clark had conquered the West. He built an empire that stretched from mines to smelters, from banks to railroads. His personal income reached $17 million a month in today's money. He could buy anything that was for sale in Montana. But respect is an ore you can't find underground. Aristocracy is a metal you can't smelt in a furnace. For those, he would have to go east. He had made his millions. Now, he was going to spend them. And he was going to build a weapon that would force the high society of New York to its knees. A weapon of stone and marble. In Montana, William Clark was a king. His word was law. His will drove the economy. He owned the land, the politicians, and the future of an entire state. But New York was not Montana. Here, on the island of Manhattan, the rules were different. The ruler here wasn't brute force, but the silent wall of old money. The Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Goulds. Their power was invisible, but absolute. They didn't shout about their wealth. They inherited it. Their money didn't smell of sulfur and sweat. Their money smelled of lavender and generations of dividends. To them, Clark was nothing more than an upstart, a nouveau riche from the West, whose fortune was stained with corruption and bad taste. They didn't declare war on him. They simply ignored him. And for a man obsessed with status, this was worse than any insult. Clark realized he couldn't enter this fortress through the front gate. Fine. If he couldn't knock politely, he would take the door off its hinges. And so he decided to build a weapon. A siege engine of stone and marble, so enormous, so outrageously expensive, that it would be impossible to ignore. His mansion. Every decision in its construction was a tactical move in this social war. First was the location, the corner of 5th Avenue and 77th Street. This wasn't just buying land. It was seizing a beachhead. He planted his flag in the very heart of enemy territory, directly across from the mansions of those who despised him. It was a brazen invasion. Second was the architect. He didn't hire an American, one of the court architects of the New York elite. He imported legitimacy directly from Paris, hiring a Frenchman, Henri de Glane. He was saying, You build your homes by American rules? I will build by the rules of European monarchs. And finally, the style. A screaming, excessive, theatrical beaux-arts. While the old money mansions aimed for the restrained elegance of English country estates or French chateaux, Clark chose a style associated with imperial grandeur. His house was meant to resemble not a gentleman's residence, but the Paris Opera, or a wing of the Louvre. The façade, overloaded with columns, sculptures, and garlands, was a direct challenge to everything the old aristocracy valued: moderation and taste. Their homes were subtle statements. His home was meant to be a deafening verdict. His message was simple and crude, clear to anyone who saw this architectural monster. My house is my Versailles, and I am your king. He had drawn up his plan of invasion. He had chosen his weapon. But he didn't yet know that his first battle wouldn't be with the Astors and Vanderbilts. It would be with the earth, with time, and with reality itself. William Clark was used to the world bending to his will. He could force a mountain to give him its copper. He could force a legislature to sell him its votes. He was a master of submission. And in 1897, he gave the order, build a palace. But he came up against an enemy that didn't take bribes and couldn't be threatened: reality itself. The first battle was with the earth. To support the weight of his ambition, the foundation had to go deep into the bedrock of Manhattan. This wasn't construction. It was an excavation on a military scale. Hundreds of men, horse-drawn carts, steam, and dynamite. An open wound appeared on the face of the most expensive neighborhood in the world. The house hadn't even begun to rise, but it was already demanding a sacrifice from the land itself. Then began the war against space and time. Clark didn't want just materials. He wanted a legend. The stone for the facade had to come from a specific quarry in Maine, known for its strength and color. The marble, from the same veins in Carrara that Michelangelo used for his masterpieces. The wood, from the deepest forests of Santo Domingo. He wasn't ordering building supplies. He was ordering fragments of the planet. And the planet responded with cold indifference. The quarry in Maine, having received the largest order in its history, couldn't keep up. Harsh winters, equipment breakdowns, the sheer hardness of the granite, everything worked against Clark's schedule. A year passed, and there was still no facade. 2 years passed. A giant, fenced-off crater gaped at the corner of Fifth Avenue. The empty space that was meant to be a symbol of his triumph had become a monument to his impotence. The New York press, which hated him, gloated. Cartoons depicted Clark sitting on a pile of money next to an empty pit. Newspapers wrote that it was easier to build a canal through Panama than a house for the Copper King. Every month of delay was a public humiliation. When the materials finally began to arrive, a new battle began. Shipments of rare marble that had crossed the Atlantic arrived with flaws, hairline cracks, the wrong shade. For any other builder, these were minor annoyances. For Clark, obsessed with perfection, it was a betrayal. He sent entire shipments back, dooming the project to more months of waiting. Every returned crate of marble was an act of his will against the imperfections of the world, and every such act cost him a fortune. The construction, planned for a few years, turned into an epic siege. The 20th century began. The Spanish-American War came and went. President McKinley was assassinated, and Clark's house was still a skeleton of scaffolding. He had won the war with the earth. He seemed to be winning the war with logistics. The skeleton of his palace finally rose above Fifth Avenue. But a skeleton is not a body. To give it flesh and breathe a soul into it, Clark needed an army of invisible masters whose hands would create the beauty he could only buy. Who really built this palace? The newspapers wrote about William Clark, his millions, his vanity. But the newspapers didn't write about Antonio, Giuseppe, and Luigi. They didn't write about Patrick and Sean. They didn't write about Hans and Friedrich. Hundreds of nameless immigrants whose names would never be carved on the marble walls, but whose hands raised those walls. This was an army of invisible craftsmen, Italian stonecutters, whose fathers and grandfathers had worked the stone for the cathedrals of the old world, now carved ornate garlands for the Copper King's palace. Their sweat mixed with granite dust, and their songs in a foreign tongue were drowned out by the clang of hammers. For 10 hours of grueling work, they earned a few dollars, an amount Clark made in a fraction of a second. Every curl on a column's capital was a day of one man's life, given for the whim of another. Irish builders, who had fled famine, erected the steel skeleton of this giant. They balanced on beams at dizzying heights, without safety nets, risking their lives for a steady wage. They were building a symbol of luxury, but lived in the crowded tenements of the Lower East Side. Their work was a defiant act of creation, set against the scorn the city had for this project. German carpenters, famous for their precision, created the intricate wood panels, doors, and window frames. They worked with mahogany from Santo Domingo and English oak, materials they could only have dreamed of. Their skill was undeniable, but it served another's ambition. They were creating interiors they would never be allowed to enter as a guest. This was the great paradox of the Gilded Age, embodied in one building. The poorest, most powerless people in America were building the most extravagant monument to wealth. They were creating a symbol of luxury that was utterly unattainable to them. Their hands, calloused from labor, gave shape to the dreams of a man who never held anything heavier than a stock certificate. We will not find their names in architectural journals. Their voices were not preserved in diaries. But their legacy is here, in every detail, every joint, every masterfully carved acanthus leaf. They didn't just build a house, they were building New York. With their own hands, they were creating a myth that was alien to them, but that fed their families. Society saw this building as nothing more than Clark's Folly. But for hundreds of workers, it was something else. It was their Colosseum, their cathedral, their daily battle for survival. They were invisible to the owner, invisible to the press, but without their skill and their sacrifice, the most expensive house in America would have remained a hole in the ground. If stone was the flesh of this palace and steel was its skeleton, then bronze was its soul, the cold, heavy, unyielding soul of William Clark. 250 tons. That's the weight of a blue whale, the weight of a locomotive. That is the weight of the metal Clark poured into his home to prove his importance. His battle for bronze became a legend. It wasn't just a purchase of material. It was an act of total control, a demonstration of power over matter itself. He trusted no one. Every sketch, every model passed through his hands. Giant foundries in France and America worked exclusively on his order, becoming the personal workshops of the Copper King. Imagine the creation of the main doors. These weren't just doors. They were the gates to his empire. Dozens of artisans sculpted full-size models from clay, depicting scenes from classical mythology. Clark personally approved every fold in a tunic, every muscle on a hero's body. Sketches, covered in his angry notes, crossed the Atlantic again and again. More grandeur, not enough power, he wrote in the margins. He demanded from metal the same thing he demanded from people, complete submission. And then, the staircase. It was not meant to simply lead upwards. It was meant to ascend. The railings, the balusters, the decorative panels, all were cast from solid bronze, polished to a mirror shine. When it was being installed, workers realized that the normal floor joists couldn't bear its weight. The steel frame had to be reinforced. The staircase was so heavy that it dictated the architecture of the house. It was a heart of metal that demanded a body be built around it. The light fixtures were like chandeliers from a royal palace, each weighing several hundred pounds. Window frames, doorknobs, even the ventilation grates, everything was bronze. It was an obsession. The metal that had made him rich underground in Montana would now make him an aristocrat on the surface in New York. This battle for bronze was a symbol of his character. He wasn't seeking harmony. He was seeking weight. He wasn't striving for elegance. He was striving for indestructibility. Bronze is the metal of monuments, the metal of eternity. He was covering his house in armor as if expecting an attack. Every bronze element was a shield against society's scorn, against the fleeting nature of time. Clark spent over $500,000 on the bronze alone, a sum that could have built an entire city block of ordinary homes. He won this battle. He got his bronze fortress. But in his quest to create something eternal and monumental, he missed one detail. Bronze is an incredibly cold material, and he filled his home with a chill that the warmth of human life could never drive out. On the outside, William Clark's house was a hymn to the past. The facade, draped in stone, screamed of Versailles, of the grandeur of French kings, of an era when power was absolute and carved in marble. It was dressed in the clothes of Louis XIV, the Sun King. But beneath this opulent cloak, a secret was hidden, a secret that betrayed the true nature of its creator. If you peel off the granite skin of this palace, scrape away the marble, you would see what no one was meant to see. A steel skeleton. The same kind used in the skyscrapers that were already beginning to reach for the sky in the city's business district. It was the most modern, most American technology of its time, hidden inside the most conservative and European shell. It was a great architectural paradox. To bring the fantasies of the old regime to life, engineers had to use the tools of the new world. 17th century style stone walls simply couldn't have supported the weight of the giant galleries, the marble floors, and of course, 250 tons of bronze. The house would have collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. The engineering blueprints tell the story of this secret battle of technologies. Here is a steel beam, calculated to the millimeter, to carry the weight of an art gallery with a glass ceiling. And here is a complex system of trusses, hidden behind gilded panels, to support the massive bronze staircase. The facade screamed, "I am an aristocrat." The skeleton whispered, "I am an industrialist." This conflict was a metaphor for William Clark himself, a man who made his fortune on the most advanced methods of mining and smelting, on railroads and the telegraph, on the steel nerves of industrial America. But he spent that fortune trying to pass himself off as an heir to old European nobility. He was a predator of capitalism who wanted to be seen as a shepherd from Arcadia. The house was just like him. Beneath a thin veneer of purchased culture lay a ruthless and efficient frame, a frame built to bear any load, to withstand any pressure. It was a structure built not for beauty, but for survival and dominance. The other mansions of Fifth Avenue relied on tradition and thick stone walls. Clark's house relied on cold calculation and steel. It was born in the age of the skyscraper, but was desperately pretending to be a palace. And in this duality, in this collision of old and new, lay its greatest vulnerability. It tried to be everything at once, but risked becoming nothing at all. His palace was a Frankenstein's monster, the body of a king, the skeleton of a tycoon. And New York noticed. William Clark thought he was building a fortress. He was wrong. He was building a target. The higher the walls of his palace rose, the more marble and bronze he poured into his creation, the fiercer the fire of public contempt became. His battle with building materials was over. Now, the battle with people began. New York was not impressed. It was outraged. The newspapers that had once been his weapon in Montana now turned against him. Every day brought a new dose of poison. Journalists competed in wit, inventing new nicknames for the house. An architectural hodgepodge, a pile of bad taste, a monument to audacity. But one name stuck and became its second identity, Clark's Folly. This wasn't just scorn, it was entertainment. New Yorkers came to 77th Street as if to the theater, to gawk at the growing monster. They laughed at its excess, at its pomposity. Clark's mansion became a citywide joke, a symbol of everything that was wrong with new money, gaudy, tasteless, and desperately trying to buy what wasn't for sale. The climax of this war was a single cartoon. Puck magazine, the leading satirical publication of the era, put an image on its cover that went down in history. It showed William Clark, dressed in a Napoleon-style uniform, standing atop a mountain of money bags. At his feet was a model of his ridiculous palace, and the caption read, "He has captured Butte. Can he capture Fifth Avenue?" The image was chosen perfectly. Napoleon, the upstart who crowned himself, the genius who became a tyrant, the man who tried to conquer the old aristocracy of Europe by force and failed. To New York society, Clark was exactly that, the Napoleon of Fifth Avenue. His house was not a palace, but a monument to his own ego, as absurd as a tricorn hat on the head of a senator from Montana. He built his fortress to protect himself from their mockery, but the walls didn't help. On the contrary, they only amplified the sound of their laughter. He was under siege. He had spent millions to be noticed, and he was. But instead of admiration, he received only sarcasm. Every morning, reading the newspapers, he knew he was losing this war. He had built the most expensive house in America, only to become the biggest joke in town. He could buy senators, he could buy foundries, but he could not buy respect. And he failed to realize that the greatest threat to his legacy would not come from the outside, not from the pages of newspapers. It would grow from within, in his own family. The walls of Clark's palace were thick. They were meant to protect him from a hostile world, from the barbs of the press, from the cold contempt of the New York elite. But no walls, neither granite nor marble, can protect from a rift within. While the city laughed at Clark's folly, a quiet but destructive war was brewing inside the Clark family itself. William Clark had children from his first marriage, adults, established in their own right. They had grown up in the Wild West, had seen their father's empire being built. They knew the price of every dollar, a price paid in sweat, risk, and often in other people's lives. And now they watched in horror as their father threw that fortune into the furnace of his own vanity. To them, the mansion on Fifth Avenue was not a triumph. It was a betrayal, a monumental, monstrous waste of money that could have been working, multiplying, building new enterprises. They saw the house not as a monument to strength, but as a symptom of senile madness. They refused to visit it. They refused to have anything to do with it. But the crack in the family ran much deeper. In 1901, at the height of construction, the 62-year-old William Clark did something that shocked even the worldly society of the Gilded Age. He married in secret. His chosen bride was Anna LaChapelle, a young woman who was only 23. But this was not just a marriage with a huge age gap. Clark had been her legal guardian since she was 15. He had taken her under his protection, promising to care for her like a daughter. He broke that promise in the most scandalous way possible. He hid the marriage for 3 years, even from his own family. He lived with his young wife, but presented her to society as his ward. It was a lie built on fear and shame. When the truth finally came out, it was the last straw. For his older children, it was proof that their father had completely lost touch with reality. The palace he was building now took on a sinister meaning. It wasn't being built for a dynasty. It was being built for a young wife and a new family, meant to displace the old one. Every room, every gallery, every ton of bronze was now seen as an insult, a monument to his selfishness and betrayal. The house that was meant to unite the Clark clan and declare its power became the cause of its collapse. It turned into a bone of contention, a stumbling block that would forever divide father and children. Clark had won the battle against materials. He was withstanding the siege of public opinion. But he had lost the war for his own family. He was building a home for a new queen, but in the process, he had destroyed his kingdom. And he did not yet know that the greatest tragedies of this house were still to come. William Clark understood that money could buy luxury. But could it buy history? Could it buy authenticity? He decided to find out. If you can't be born an aristocrat, perhaps you can import aristocracy, piece by piece. And so, his agents in France found a treasure, not just a painting or a sculpture, but an entire room, the Salon Doré, the Gilded Room, an interior from the Hôtel de Soubise in Paris, created in the mid-18th century, the era of Madame de Pompadour and Louis XV. This was not a replica. This was history itself. Within these walls, court intrigues were whispered, harpsichord music played, and the diamonds of French nobility sparkled. This room had seen more genuine aristocracy than Clark had in his entire life, and he wanted it. What happened next was not a purchase. It was a surgical operation. A team of craftsmen, like a team of surgeons, entered the historic mansion. They didn't just remove the panels from the walls. They disassembled the room down to its molecules. Every carved detail, every gilded flourish, every fragment of mirror was carefully dismantled. Each element was assigned a number. Hundreds, thousands of numbered pieces of someone else's soul. Then, everything was packed into custom-made crates. Dozens of boxes, stuffed with straw and history, were loaded onto a ship and sent across the Atlantic. It was the apotheosis of Clark's philosophy. If you can't belong to history, just buy it, take it apart, and bring it home. In New York, amidst the construction chaos of his palace, the second phase of the operation began. A team of French artisans, brought over with the room, began to assemble this giant, priceless puzzle, number by number, piece by piece. Before the astonished eyes of American workers, they resurrected a ghost of Versailles in the heart of Manhattan. It was like magic, or sacrilege. The Salon Doré was not just a decorative element, it was a transplant. Clark was trying to transplant the heart of old European aristocracy into the chest of his monster of steel and granite. He believed that the gilding of the 18th century could hide the smell of 19th century copper, that the grace of Rococo would make people forget the crudeness of Bribes. He got his room, a perfect, gleaming gold time capsule. But he overlooked one thing. A room is not just walls, it's the air, the light, the people who fill it. He had stolen the body, but the soul remained in France. He had created the perfect stage, but the actors never arrived, and this golden room, instead of becoming the center of social life, became the most exquisite and lonely cage in the world. At the heart of every cathedral, there is a voice capable of filling the vast space, rising to the highest vaults, and making the very stone tremble. It is the voice of the pipe organ. William Clark wasn't just building a house, he was building his personal cathedral to vanity. And this cathedral needed a voice. He ordered an organ. But this wasn't just a musical instrument. It was a monster, a masterpiece of art and engineering, created by the finest craftsmen of the time. Its price was $120,000. In today's money, that's over $3.5 million. For that amount, you could build a hospital, found a university, or fund the annual budget of a small American town. Clark spent it on an organ. Its installation was an epic in itself. Hundreds of pipes, from tiny ones the size of a pencil to giant ones several meters high, were delivered and assembled in a special alcove in the main hall. It took months to assemble this complex mechanism of wood, leather, and metal. And then, the tuning. Masters lived in the house for weeks, calibrating every note, striving for the perfect sound in the vast acoustics of the marble hall. The organ became a symbol, the pinnacle of the house's absurdity. It was a statement of scale. The house was so large that it required an instrument of cathedral-like power just to fill the emptiness with sound. It was an architectural megaphone designed to amplify one man's voice and make it sound like the voice of God. But within this symbol lay a tragic irony. An organ is an instrument for large gatherings, for services, for concerts, for celebrations. It is made to be heard by hundreds of people, uniting them in a shared experience. But who was this organ meant to play for? For a small, fractured family, huddling in a few rooms? For the ghosts of French aristocrats in the Salon Doré? Clark had installed the most powerful voice in his house, but he had nothing to say. He had built a stage, but he had no audience. The great organ, capable of shaking the walls, was mostly silent. Its pipes, gleaming in the twilight, looked like the barrels of cannons that were never destined to be fired. This instrument, bought for a fabulous sum, became the most expensive symbol of silence. It was ready to pour floods of music by Bach and Handel into the house, but instead, it only reflected the echoing emptiness of rooms filled not with sound, but with silence. A silence that not even the most powerful organ in the world could drown out. The question wasn't whether anyone would play it. The question was whether anyone would be there to listen. 1911. 14 years. 14 years of battling the earth, time, public opinion, and his own family. That's longer than the Civil War. Longer than the construction of the Panama Canal. For 14 years, William Clark fought his personal Trojan War. And now, it was over. The last worker left the building. The final coat of varnish dried. The scaffolding that had hidden his creation for so long was removed. And New York gasped. Not with admiration, with shock. The final cost came to $7 million. In today's money, that's $250 million. This sum wasn't just large, it was offensive. It was money that could have changed the lives of thousands, but was instead turned into a personal monument to one man. The figures that leaked to the press sounded like reports from a fantasy novel. 121 rooms. 31 bathrooms with fixtures of solid silver. 4 art galleries filled with old master paintings, a stable of marble and bronze for 25 horses, a wine cellar for 15,000 bottles, an underground railway delivering coal directly to the boilers. Every detail was designed to overwhelm. 70 massive columns adorned the facade. Inside, marble from Italy and Africa, mahogany from Santo Domingo, English oak, satinwood, 4 elevators, a central vacuum system. refrigeration rooms the size of a small apartment. This wasn't just a victory, it was a triumph. William Clark had won. He had forced matter to submit to his will. He had built a palace that eclipsed everything that had come before it on Fifth Avenue. He had made the city talk about him. The camera slowly glides through the empty, newly finished rooms, over gleaming marble floors that reflect gilded ceilings, through silent galleries where Dutch burghers and French aristocrats stare from portraits, through the giant dining room where 100 guests could be seated. Everything is perfect. Everything is in its place. Everything is ready. But for what? Clark was 72 years old. He stood at the threshold of his palace, his greatest creation. He had won all the battles. He had built his fortress. But looking back, he could see that the battlefield was empty. His enemies, the Astors and Vanderbilts, never acknowledged him. His allies, his own family, had turned their backs on him. He had built the grandest theater in the world. But the cast had fled, and the audience had booed the play without even seeing the first act. Was this a victory? Or was it the most expensive and lonely defeat in history? The dream had come true. The palace doors opened, but no one came in. William Clark expected New York's high society to line up to see his triumph, but the invitations went unanswered. The house did not become the center of social life. It became the most expensive mausoleum in the world. Life inside the golden cage stood still. Of the 121 rooms, the family, Clark, his young wife Anna, and their 2 daughters, occupied only a few. The other 90% of the house was lifeless space, museum halls where drafts and the ghosts of ambition roamed. 40 servants maintained perfect order in rooms that no one ever entered. They polished bronze that no one touched and buffed floors that no one walked on. For the younger daughter, Huguette, this house was her entire world, her only world. She grew up in unimaginable luxury, but in complete isolation. Her playgrounds were the giant art galleries. Her only friends were dolls dressed in gowns by Parisian couturiers. She knew nothing of a normal life, had no contact with her peers. Her childhood was spent in a sterile, gilded silence, far from the noise and grime of the real city. This house, built to impress the world, had in fact become a prison, walling her off from that world forever. And then, the dream turned into a curse. In 1919, tragedy struck the house, a tragedy against which marble walls and millions of dollars were powerless. Clark's older daughter from his second marriage, 16-year-old André, his favorite, fell ill with meningitis, and she died. Her death shattered the family's fragile world. Grief settled into the giant rooms, and it could not be displaced. The enormous house, which had never been filled with laughter, was now filled with silence and sorrow. Every gallery, every hall, became a reminder of loss. The great organ was silent. The golden salon seemed to tarnished. For William Clark, it was the final, crushing blow. He had built a monument to his success, but it had turned into a tombstone for his happiness. He wanted to create a dynasty, but he had lost his heir. Everything he had fought for had turned to dust. He could control metal, stone, and politicians, but he could not control life and death. The palace on Fifth Avenue became his personal hell, cold, empty, filled with memories of what he had achieved and what he had lost. He would live in it for another 6 years, 6 years surrounded by ghosts, in the most magnificent prison a man has ever built for himself. March 2nd, 1925. In one of the bedrooms of the giant palace, surrounded by French tapestries and Italian marble, a man was dying. He was 86 years old. He had lived a life like a geological fault line, full of pressure, fire, and crushing force. He was the last of the Copper Kings, and with his final breath, the fate of his greatest creation was sealed. William Clark lived in the house of his dreams for only 14 years, the same 14 years it took to build it, as if a cruel irony of fate had allotted him exactly as much time to enjoy the fruits of his labor as he had spent cultivating them. He died, and with him died the sole reason for the house's existence. For the world, it was the end of an era. For his heirs, it was the end of a burden. His widow Anna, his surviving daughter Huguette, and his children from his first marriage gathered not to mourn a legacy, but to get rid of one. Their decision was immediate and unanimous. Sell it. No one, not one of them, wanted to live in that cold, expensive monster. For the older children, it had always been a symbol of their father's selfishness and extravagance. For Anna and Huguette, it was a place saturated with grief and loneliness, a mausoleum where their daughter and sister André had died. This house was built as an eternal monument to one man. His will was its foundation, his ambition its steel frame. And when that will was extinguished, the entire structure began to crumble. It had been held up not by granite and steel, but by the stubbornness of one old man. The upkeep of the palace cost $120,000 a year, an astronomical sum that no one wanted to spend to maintain a museum that brought neither joy nor status. The Gilded Age, the era of conspicuous consumption, was drawing to a close. The world had changed. The First World War had swept away old empires, and with them, the belief that wealth could be eternal. The palace that was meant to be the cradle of the Clark dynasty was orphaned the moment its creator died. It was too big, too expensive, too personal. It was the architectural reflection of one man, and without that man, it lost all meaning. The heirs put it up for sale. They expected collectors of luxury, the new millionaires of the Jazz Age, to rush into a bidding war for this unique trophy. They waited and waited, but the phone remained silent. The king was dead, and it turned out that his kingdom was wanted by no one. The most expensive house in America was wanted by no one. The clouds of the Great Depression were already gathering on the horizon, and the age of gigantism was dying. No one wanted palaces anymore. The newly rich preferred penthouses, luxurious but compact, soaring above the city rather than rooted in its stone. Clark's mansion was a dinosaur, a relic of a bygone world that had become an unsellable asset. In 1927, just 2 years after its creator's death, the fortress fell. It was sold, not to an art connoisseur, not to another millionaire, to a property developer. And it was sold not to be lived in, but to be demolished. The sale price was less than $3 million, less than half of what it cost to build. The most prized creation of the Gilded Age was sold at a loss, like a bankrupt company. And then, the unthinkable began. A new army came to Fifth Avenue, not stonecutters and gilders, but workers with sledgehammers and crowbars, and they began a ritualistic killing. Footage of the demolition is shocking even today. We see sledgehammers crashing into marble columns, turning them to dust. We see bronze reliefs that took years to create being torn from the walls and thrown into the back of a truck like scrap metal. This wasn't just destruction. It was an act of historical vengeance. New York, which had despised this house for so long, now watched with relish as it was erased from the face of the earth. An era was washing away its sins by destroying their most garish symbols. In its place, on a foundation of ambition and dust, rose an elegant apartment building. 960 Fifth Avenue, a symbol of a new era, where luxury had become more restrained, more practical. The ghost was exorcised. So what was left? What became the true legacy of William Clark? Not his palace. His art collection, rejected by the Metropolitan Museum of Art because of his humiliating conditions, became the basis for the Clark Art Institute, one of the finest small museums in the world. And his daughter Huguette, raised in a golden cage, became the most famous recluse of the 20th century, living to be 104 in voluntary isolation, surrounded by empty apartments and memories. Her tragic story became an echo of the loneliness that was laid into the foundation of her home. And of course, this room remains, the Salon Doré. Rescued from the rubble, it outlived its captor. Today it stands in a museum, quiet and flawless. William Clark wanted to buy himself immortality, carved in stone. But the stone turned to dust. He found immortality where he least expected it, in the art he collected, and in the cautionary tale of vanity that we are still telling today. In the story that proves a true legacy cannot be built. It can only be earned. The story of William Clark is a parable about foundations. He proved that you can build the most expensive house in the world, but he also showed that a legacy built on vanity and loneliness is destined to turn to dust. So what are we really building when we try to immortalize ourselves in stone? And what is left of us when that stone inevitably crumbles? This parable of vanity is over, but the conversation is just beginning. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories that make you think about the eternal are what you're looking for, subscribe to the channel and support us with a like so we can keep telling them.